Hello there, this is Martin Richardson coming from MarketScale Studio. We're having our first episode of SkyShift today, and I'm very fortunate to have Nicholas Zart as my first guest. Nicholas has been in the industry for a considerable amount of time, and that being said, Nicholas, how about a little introduction about yourself?
Oh my goodness, a little introduction? Are you kidding me? You know me better than that. It's going to take forever. It all started on a day where I was, no, forget it. So basically, I'm Nicholas Zart, and I'm the founder and CEO of Electric Air Mobility, LLC. I've always been around mobility devices. When I was 2 months old, I was in my father's airplane. At 6 years old, I saw my very first car was a Bugatti Type 35, Type 37. I can't remember. So I've always been around that. I fell off a skateboard 5 years ago, and that pretty much ended my career there. And so I got bored with cars and airplanes in the 90s. That 757 is great. The Airbus 300 was great, but it was, kind of lackluster. Same thing with cars. And in 2003, 2004, I was hearing about, we called them electric cars at the time. And I started looking into it. And this is the pre-Elon Musk Tesla days, right? So this is Martin Eberhard and Ian Wright. And I was just starting to get really interested in that. I met the guys at AC Propulsion who gave us the very first EVs, as we call them now. And so by around 2006, 2007, I started writing. I was one of the first writers to write about these cool little electric cars. And the reason why I got into it, especially, with my background with old cars and Alfa Romeos and all of that souped up engine stuff, is I got to drive an AC propulsion e-box, and then later on one of the very first Tesla Roadsters. And well, Martin, it was liberating, liberating like this, because I didn't have to like listen to my engine. I didn't have to think about what gear I was in. I didn't have to work on a clutch. It was just an accelerator in my two hands. And I remember feeling actually very calm, which is really weird, right? When you have a souped up Alfa Romeo, like a 1974 Spider with a race engine, adrenaline.
You literally started with electricity on the ground, and then when did you start taking flight? When did you become airborne?
Airborne was in 2014 when I saw Hamilton. It was at the time they were called Dufour Hamilton, and now they're called Dufour Aerospace. I saw that they were flying an Acrobat airplane for a half hour with a 15-minute reserve, and I thought, wow, totally beat me, because I thought the maritime world would electrify itself before the aviation world. But when I saw what these guys were doing, I saw what Pipistrel had been doing since the 90s, which I had been following. And of course, Joby, people were kind of talking about these guys. I was like, that's it. So that's when I switched over completely. I got to know the Vertical Flight Society very well, worked with them very briefly. And right around 2019, I thought of like the epiphany was, wow, gee whiz, it's all really nice looking at all these aircraft and eVTOLs and eSTOLs and eCTOLs and EVs, but without infrastructure, they're very expensive paperweight. So I really devoted all of my energy into the infrastructure side of things. So today we work on what we call vertiports, modern iteration of heliports and airports, and that's where electric aircraft will land and take off. And that includes energy management, energy production solutions. So charging stations, storage, hydrogen, Jet A, SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, and all of that kind of good stuff, including all the management, uncrewed traffic management, air traffic management, terminals. So the whole kit and caboodle, and also wrapping it all together with EVs, with railroads, with all of that. So it's really a convergence of mobility. But yeah, advanced air mobility is where I am.
You point something out very strongly here to me, and that is, eVTOL, the actual aircraft, are getting all the limelight. That's what people are interested in. But the ground infrastructure is in some ways much more important than that, because it not only connects you with the eVTOL, but as you mentioned, there's the rail infrastructure, there's how passengers get on board. It sounds like a huge undertaking. Hit some of the highlights of where we're at today, because as I say, eVTOL tends to get all the story. Tell us more about the infrastructure.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. It's exactly right. And I kind of joke when I talk to everybody in the industry on the eVTOL side of things. It's like, haha, you guys think you're cool. We are the glue that bonds it all together. You need us more than we need you. That's why we don't advertise. We don't need to. So no, indeed, I think in some ways it's very similar to what the eVTOL eSTOL industry is going through. We're also waiting for certification and the governing authorities to give us the final deals. But so far, we follow what the U.S. Federal Aviation Agency (FAA) does and Europe's EASA's, and we do have some basic guidelines. EB 105, and over there they have the I always forget the VST PTD. Those give us the fundamental understanding of how we can design our vertiports, which are very similar to how heliports work. All eyes are on the US. It's the biggest market. The second biggest market is, of course, Europe. But we've been very present in the Middle East, the whole MENA region. So, from Oman to Saudi to Kuwait. And we found that it's absolutely ripe for becoming a global international platform for advanced mobility, specifically the Emirates, where we've had wonderful conversations with the government, with the aviation authorities, with lots of prominent companies. And there's almost that, the Middle East is always like three countries and three other countries working together. But when you look at the UAE, you look at Saudi Arabia, and you look at Qatar, they really work together on trying to outdo each other and try to become the platform for the next generations of mobility. And the Emirates have done a fantastic job. I mean, they put their money where their mouth is, basically. So they've welcomed us over there.
That's awesome. Is there any specific, infrastructure is going to be a challenge in every country because of different climates. Obviously, the Middle East, you think of very hot temperatures and lots of sand. There's some areas in which that's going to be a plus, and there's some areas that's going to be a minus. Did you notice any specific challenges or benefits to infrastructure in these areas?
Plenty of them. I wouldn't say that, although it does play a big part in it, the environment is a big part of it, but the bigger part of it is really who's going to be able to afford what first, right? So we know that right now, pure electric eVTOLs, like I'm going to use SkyDrive because I think it's a pretty good example of, 3-seater, one pilot, two people, small footprint, fairly fast to recharge. These guys are most likely going to be first to the market and everything. So we think more in terms of that. And then when it comes to larger 4 or 5 seaters, most likely a hybrid. So this is really our first priority. But you're right, the environment is something that we do take into consideration. Sand, extreme humidity and heat in the middle of summer. So there are only a few electric motor companies, for instance, that do take those things into consideration. So some of these eVTOLs, some of these eSTOLs are better suited for these kind of environment. And reversely, some of them are much better suited to go up in Sweden and Norway, where, it drops down to the minuses, North Idaho and all these kind of places. So yeah, it's interesting. We're starting to see, and it's much more pronounced than in the EV industries, but we've got our own set of challenges out there. And again, thankfully, the country, the ruling families and everybody is really excited about it. So everybody, we have more means of getting to the answers there. Well, another thing too, just very quickly on the regulations, the FAA and EASA move fairly slowly, right? As we all know, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, you've got China that's moving juggernaut light year speed, right? But I find that the Middle East, especially in the UAE, they're moving at the right space, right? They're looking at what the FAA and EASA is doing. They're looking at what China is doing. They're like, okay, let's be as thorough as these guys. I'm not saying that the Chinese are not, but let's be as thorough as these guys, but let's also move a little bit faster, as fast as these guys. So for me, they've sort of reached a really good middle ground there, hopefully.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because there are two extremes. On the one hand, as you pointed out, in China, and then we have on the EASA FAA side in terms of, that's an interesting point. I never thought that in terms of middle ground before. So, electric UAM, what's in the future for you this summer? Any particular areas of focus?
Areas of focus are always the same. So I work with a lot of fantastic partners. We're sort of, we built a coalition of partners out there. We are working on some great projects right here in the US. And it's interesting. It's actually, we're focusing on the smaller projects, because as great as it would be to go work on the Dallas airport or Los Angeles and New York, this is going to be long term, like the big vertiports that we used to see, like 10 vertipads, 5 terminals, and that's great. But guys, that's like $30 million 10 years down the road. So we're focusing on the more practical, smaller secondary, tertiary airports here in the U.S. And in Europe, we're actually working. We're sort of using a two mode strategy of working with big international airports with countries that are, connected to other countries around them, and also at the same time developing these secondary, tertiary airport. And as you know, these secondary, tertiary airports are underused or underutilized. So we want to make sure that we work on those things. So that's what we're really doing. But we've got a few. Actually, we got a few good announcements.
Well, Nicholas, I do appreciate your time. You are, of course, my first guest on MarketScale, pioneering the eVTOL era. And again, there are lots of content. I appreciate we just touched on some of the highlights of infrastructure, but I do appreciate your time. And again, for everybody out there, Nicholas Zart, Electric UAM. If you have any questions regarding infrastructure, Nicholas is your man. And again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Martin.